This one starts with a door that shouldn't exist. I was renting a room in an old house, one of those homes with creaky floors, drafty hallways, and a history that clung to every wall. But it was cheap and close to work, so I ignored the unsettling feeling I got in those dark hallways. Until that night. One evening, as I was heading to bed, I saw it. At the end of the hallway, there was a door I knew wasn't there before. I'd walked past that end of the hallway every day for months. There was nothing but a blank wall. But now there was a door. A simple, unmarked wooden door, slightly ajar with darkness spilling out through the crack. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Had I somehow missed it? Was it always there? I don't know what possessed me to approach it, but curiosity is a strange thing. I walked down the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The closer I got, the colder the air seemed to grow, like I was stepping into some void. When I finally reached the door, I hesitated. The darkness beyond was so thick it seemed to pull me in, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I pushed the door open and peered inside, and my heart stopped. Inside I saw my room. Exactly as I'd left it, down to the clothes scattered on the floor, the unmade bed, the faint scent of my cologne lingering in the air. For a moment, I thought it was a mirror, or maybe a trick of the light, but then I noticed there was someone lying in the bed. My bed. It was me, or something that looked like me. I was lying there, perfectly still, eyes closed. I don't know how long I stood there, staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, the other me opened its eyes. It looked straight at me, and I felt a wave of cold fear wash over me. There was something wrong in those eyes. They were empty, lifeless, like they were looking at me from some other world. As I watched, the other me slowly sat up, its movements stiff and unnatural. It tilted its head, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place, a look that was somehow familiar, yet completely alien. And then, without warning, it began to crawl out of the bed, inching toward the door, toward me. I stumbled back, heart racing, barely able to breathe. I wanted to run, to close the door, but I was frozen in place, caught between fear and disbelief. The other me reached the edge of the bed, its hands gripping the sheets as it dragged itself forward, its eyes locked on mine. That's when I finally snapped out of it and slammed the door shut, my hands shaking as I backed away. That night, I locked myself in my room, unable to sleep, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. The next morning, the door was gone. It was as if it had never existed. But every night, just before midnight, I hear it. Soft footsteps outside my door, pacing, waiting. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see it, that other version of me, crawling toward the door. It was a little after midnight, and all was quiet, but not the comforting kind of quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed in from all sides, thick and oppressive. I just moved to this quiet neighborhood, a place with an old-world charm and streets that were silent by 9 p.m. The people were kind, but there was something about the stillness at night that felt heavy. As I lay in bed, my mind drifting to thoughts of sleep, I heard it. A soft tapping sound, faint, barely there, but unmistakable. I strained to hear it, convinced it was just a stray thought, a trick of the mind. But then it happened again, a light, almost rhythmic tapping at the window. I dismissed it at first, thinking it might be a branch tapping or maybe the wind, except I'd noticed before that there were no trees near my window. That's when I felt it, a chill creeping down my spine, that sense you get when you're being watched. I wanted to ignore it, to roll over and pretend nothing was there. But curiosity, or maybe fear, forced me to check. I moved toward the window, my footsteps barely making a sound. My heart was racing, my breath shallow. With a trembling hand, I lifted the curtain, and there it was, a face, pale, twisted, and watching me. Dark eyes, hollow and endless, stared back at me. They didn't just look at me, they looked through me, like they were searching for something, seeing something within me that I couldn't even understand. The face pressed closer to the glass, so close I could see the roughness of its skin, its lips pulling into an eerie smile that stretched too wide, stretching until it seemed impossible for it to go any further. It was as if the face was bending, twisting with an unnatural hunger, as though this twisted smile would split its entire face. I felt paralyzed. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was like my mind and body had been trapped, held captive by those dark, lifeless eyes. And then, as if that wasn't enough, it whispered something. A sound that barely brushed the edge of my hearing, yet felt as if it was echoing within my own head. "Let me in. Please. Let me in." The words repeated, soft and pleading, a sickening contrast to the twisted smile on its face. It was begging, yet there was something sinister in its tone, like it was playing a game, pretending to need help when, in reality, it was waiting for me to give in. The smile stretched wider, eyes unblinking, as if daring me to unlock the window, to let it into my world. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I forced myself to step back, pulling the curtain shut as I stumbled away from the window. My heart pounded like a drum, my body shaking uncontrollably. I backed into the far corner of my room, eyes fixed on the window, waiting, hoping it was gone. But the whisper continued. I could still hear it, faint but persistent. "Let me in." I covered my ears, trying to drown it out, but it seemed to echo within my mind. That night, I sat in the corner, clutching a blanket around me like it would somehow protect me from whatever was out there. Sleep was impossible, and every sound felt amplified, every creak and groan of the house making me jump. Hours passed, but that whisper, those words haunted me until dawn. The next day, I convinced myself it was just a nightmare, a trick of the mind. I pulled back the curtain in daylight, the window empty, the world outside bright and ordinary. For a while, I tried to believe it was over, that it was just a one-time event. But each night, as darkness fell, the tapping returned, followed by that smile, that face staring back at me, whispering its plea for entry. I don't know how long I endured it. Each night, I grew weaker, unable to sleep, dreading what I'd see when I opened that curtain. It became a part of my life, a nightly ritual of horror. And even after I moved far away, across the country, some nights I still hear it. It started as a whisper, so faint that I thought it was just my imagination. A soft murmur drifting through the walls, almost like a draft. My apartment was an old basement unit with thin walls that seemed to echo every sound. But as the nights went on, that whisper grew louder, more persistent. Every night, like clockwork, the whisper would begin at exactly 3 a.m., filling the silence with a voice so desperate it made my skin crawl. "Help me. Please. I'm so cold." I tried to brush it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just the wind or the creaks of an old building settling in the night. But deep down I knew it was something else. The voice had a sadness to it, a pain that felt too real to be a simple trick of the mind. Each night it grew louder, more urgent, pleading with me for help. I started losing sleep, lying in bed, wide awake, waiting for the whisper to start. And every time it did, at exactly 3 a.m., like some unbreakable curse. I could feel the weight of the voice pressing down on me, filling the room with a coldness that seeped into my bones. It was as if the voice was coming from the walls themselves, surrounding me, begging me to listen. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed my ear against the wall, listening, trying to trace the source of the sound. The whisper seemed to be coming from a specific spot, just behind my bed. It was faint, muffled, but I could make out every word, each plea sharper than the last. "Please, I'm so cold, let me out." The words sent a chill down my spine. I felt a strange compulsion, an urge I couldn't resist. In a frenzy, I grabbed a hammer and began tearing away at the drywall, chipping and prying until the old, faded plaster began to crumble. I didn't care about the mess. I just needed to know what was behind that wall. As I pulled away the last bit of plaster, I felt my heart skip a beat. Inside the wall, there was a small cavity, just big enough to hold a few objects. And there, lying in the dark, was a photograph. It was old, yellowed at the edges, with a faded image of a young girl staring back at me. She looked no older than 12, her eyes wide with fear, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes, they seemed to hold a sorrow that made my stomach twist. I felt as if those eyes were staring into me, pleading with me, just like the voice in the walls. I couldn't tear my gaze away. And then, as I held the photograph, I heard it again, closer this time, almost as if the voice was right behind me. "Please, help me. Let me out." The voice was clearer now, sharp and desperate. I could feel a presence next to me, a cold weight pressing down on my shoulder, like a hand resting there. gripping tightly. I dropped the photograph, stumbling back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I backed up until I hit the wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. In that moment, I knew this was no ordinary voice, no echo of a past tenant. It was something darker, something that had been trapped here, something that wanted, no, needed to be free. I could feel its desperation, its pain, radiating from the walls. It was as if the whole room was alive, pulsing with the memories of whatever horror had taken place here. Takes a deep breath, struggling to compose. I barely slept that night, every creak and shadow twisting into something sinister, something watching me, waiting. The next morning, I patched up the wall, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could seal away whatever was lurking inside. But that night, at exactly 3 a.m., it started again. The same whisper, the same desperate plea. "Please, I'm so cold. Help me." The voice felt sharper now, more insistent, as if it knew I had tried to shut it out. I could feel it, pressing down on me, filling the room with an icy chill that seemed to freeze the air itself. I tried covering my ears, but the voice was inside my head now, echoing, bouncing around my mind like a scream. I knew I couldn't stay there. Whatever was trapped in those walls, it wasn't going to let me go. It wanted something from me, and it wasn't going to stop until I gave in. So I left that apartment, packed up, and never looked back. I moved to a new place, far from that basement and its haunted whispers. But even now, sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I can still hear it. The same whisper, soft and pleading, like it's followed me, like it's waiting for the moment I let my guard down. I'll be lying in bed, drifting into sleep. And then I hear it, faint but unmistakable. "Help me, please, I'm so cold." And every time I feel that same chill, that same suffocating weight, pressing down on me, reminding me that some voices can never be silenced. Some stories cling to you, haunting the dark corners of your mind, and sometimes no matter how far you run, they follow, waiting to whisper in the dead of night. So the next time you hear a voice in the dark, remember, some things are better left unheard.